People see what's happening in America, and it is making people very angry. And I want to tell you something right now that I think you need to hear before anything else. The anger is justified, but some of what is being shared right now is wrong, and the real story is in some ways worse and in some ways very different, and you deserve the accurate version. Here is what is verifiable. Flock Safety operates an automated license plate reader network in more than 6,000 communities in this country. A Washington Post investigation published this month identified at least 50 officers charged with or accused of improperly accessing that data, in a number of cases to track former romantic partners. 82 Flock contracts have been terminated across 28 states, and 39 of those came in the first 5 months of this year alone. The Los Angeles Police Department walked away after an audit found 1 in 3 hot list alerts were false. And on July 17th, after public pressure, Flock killed its plan to have microphones listen for human screaming. That last one matters more than anything else in this video, and I will tell you why. There are more of these cameras in your town than there are businesses, and here is what they actually record. Let me start with what people are noticing, because the observation is completely accurate and the scale is bigger than most people realize. Flock Safety operates a surveillance network of automated license plate reader cameras in more than 6,000 communities nationwide. 6,000. That is not major cities. That is small towns, rural counties, suburban neighborhoods, homeowners associations, university campuses, and private businesses. So when somebody says they counted 8 of these cameras on the drive to their kid's school in a rural county and passed more surveillance cameras than businesses, that is not exaggeration. That is arithmetic. Now let me tell you what these devices actually capture. Because most people think license plate reader means it reads your plate. It does far more than that. The systems log the plate, yes, but they also capture what the industry calls a vehicle fingerprint. That includes make, model, and color. It includes distinguishing features, bumper stickers, roof racks, ladder racks, magnetic signs, and visible damage down to specific scratches and dents. Which means the system can find your vehicle even if it never reads your plate. If you have a dent in the passenger door and a particular bumper sticker, you are identifiable as an object moving through the network regardless of what your tag says. Then it timestamps it and geolocates it. And that record goes into a searchable database that participating agencies can query. And here is the part that transforms this from a camera into something categorically different. These databases are networked. An agency in one state can, depending on the sharing arrangements in place, search data captured by cameras in another state. So the question is no longer what a camera on your corner saw. The question is what a national mesh of cameras collectively recorded about the movements of a specific vehicle over time. That is the distinction that I think most people miss, and that matters enormously. There is a common response to all of this. If you are not doing anything wrong, you have nothing to hide. And I want to take that seriously rather than dismiss it, because a lot of decent people genuinely believe it. Here is the problem with it. There is a real legal principle that you have a reduced expectation of privacy in public. That is true, and courts have said so for a long time. If a police officer sees your car parked outside a building, that is not a search. But there is a difference between being seen and being logged. If a neighbor stood at the end of your driveway with a notebook and wrote down every time you left, where you went, and when you came back, and did it every day for 2 years, and then handed that notebook to anyone who asked, we would have a word for that. We would call it stalking, and in most states there is a statute against it. The Supreme Court has actually wrestled with this. In cases involving GPS tracking and cell phone location data, the court has recognized that comprehensive long-term tracking is different in kind, not just in degree, from an individual observation. The aggregate reveals things no single observation does. It reveals which doctor you see, what church you attend, whose house you stay at, whether you go to a support group, whether you visited a lawyer, whether you drove to a protest. So the honest version is not that these cameras see you in public, and that is fine. The honest version is that persistent automated logging of everyone's movements is a genuinely new capability. It did not exist 20 years ago, and we have not decided as a country what the rules should be. And here is the question I would put to anybody who tells you not to worry about it. If these cameras are harmless, why do so many cities fight so hard to keep the locations secret? Louisville, Kentucky is a documented example. The city has deployed a substantial number of city-owned cameras, and police also have access to many more through business, HOA, and university partnerships. Officials in the police department declined to publicly disclose exact camera locations, and the Metro Council voted down a proposal that would have required publishing them. If you are not doing anything wrong, why do you care where the cameras are? That question cuts both ways, And the fact that the people running these systems do not like it when it is pointed at them tells you something. And there is one more piece of context that I think reframes the whole debate, and it comes from the way these systems get purchased in the first place. In an enormous number of communities, a license plate reader contract never went before voters, and frequently never got a real public hearing. It was procured as equipment. A vendor gave a presentation to a police department, sometimes offered a free trial period, and the purchase was approved as a line item alongside patrol car maintenance and radio upgrades. In some places it was funded by a grant, which makes it look free to the city budget even though it is not free to anyone's civil liberties. That is how you end up with a nationwide surveillance mesh that no one at any level ever voted to build. Not because it was hidden, because it was categorized as a purchase rather than a policy. And I think that is the single most important structural fact in this entire subject. We have a system of government that requires public deliberation before you change a zoning ordinance, and that same system will install a permanent record of every vehicle's movements through your town on a consent agenda in under 4 minutes. If you want to know why nobody asked you, that is why. Nobody asked anybody. The question never reached the part of government where asking happens. A Washington Post investigation found at least 50 officers accused of using this to track women. Now here is the part that moves this out of the theoretical and into something that has already happened to real people, and it broke in early August of this year, so it is genuinely fresh. The Washington Post published an investigation documenting widespread misuse of Flock's nationwide license plate reader network by law enforcement officers. The reporting identified at least 50 officers who have been charged with or accused of improperly accessing that data for personal purposes rather than legitimate investigations. And the pattern in those cases is specific, and it is ugly. The most common misuse documented was officers tracking women connected to them through past relationships. Former girlfriends. Former wives. Women who had left them. Think about what that means practically. A woman leaves an abusive partner. She moves. She does not tell him where. She does everything right, everything a domestic violence advocate would tell her to do. And he has access to a system that logs her vehicle every time it passes a camera in 6,000 communities. That is not a hypothetical risk. That is a documented category of misuse with named victims. The reporting includes an account involving a woman in Jefferson, Georgia. And a separate ongoing report has documented officers nationwide using these tools to track not just former partners but also coworkers and acquaintances. Now I want to be fair here, because I think fairness matters, and because unfairness is how you lose people who should be on your side. 50 officers out of the enormous number who have access to these systems is a small fraction. The overwhelming majority of officers using this technology are using it to look for a stolen car or a missing child or a suspect in an actual crime, and some of those cases have genuinely good outcomes. Police departments did not adopt this to enable stalking. But that is precisely the argument, and here is why. The question with any surveillance system is never whether the people running it are good people. Most of them are. The question is what happens when one of them is not, and whether the system has any structural defense against that. And what the misuse cases reveal is that the defense was auditing after the fact. Somebody has to notice, file a complaint, and trigger a review, which means the system's protection against abuse depends entirely on the victim figuring out that they are being tracked by a database they cannot see and cannot query. How would you know? What would tip you off? Your car does not beep when it gets scanned. There is no notice. There is no record you can request that says here is everyone who looked you up this month. That asymmetry, where the system knows everything about your movements and you know nothing about who has looked, is the actual structural problem. Not bad cops. Architecture. And it gets worse when you factor in the audit findings. The Los Angeles Police Department announced it was cutting ties with Flock, joining a string of law enforcement agencies doing the same, and it did so seeking more protections around how collected information is managed and stored. An audit found that roughly 1 in 3 hot list alerts were false. 1 in 3. A hot list alert is the system telling an officer that a passing vehicle is on a list of interest. That officer then makes a stop, and in about a third of cases the underlying alert was wrong. Now put yourself in that traffic stop. An officer approaches your vehicle already believing, because a computer told him that your car is connected to something. His posture, his tone, his level of alertness, all of it is shaped by information that has a 1 in 3 chance of being incorrect, and you have no idea any of it is happening. That is how surveillance error becomes a real-world encounter, and that is the part that never shows up in a marketing brochure about crime reduction. So here is the practical piece, and there is one. Most states have public records laws, and in many jurisdictions, you can request your local police department's ALPR policy. its data retention schedule, its audit procedures, and whether it participates in interstate sharing. Those are usually public documents. Very few citizens ever ask for them, which is precisely why the answers are frequently vague. And there is one more thing worth saying here, because I think it gets lost in the politics of this. If you are a woman who has left a dangerous situation, this is not an abstract civil liberties debate for you. It is an operational security problem, and it is one that domestic violence advocates have been raising for years with very little traction. The standard safety advice given to someone fleeing an abusive partner assumes a world where hiding is possible. Change your number. Do not post your location. Be careful who knows your address. All of that advice was built for a time when finding someone required effort. A network that logs vehicle movements across 6,000 communities and can be queried by anyone with credentials changes that calculation completely, and it changes it most for the people with the most to lose. Every one of the documented misuse cases involving officers tracking former partners is a person for whom the safety plan failed because of infrastructure she never agreed to and could not opt out of. If you know someone in that situation, it is worth knowing that this exists, and worth knowing that a vehicle is now one of the most trackable things a person owns. They were going to put microphones on poles to listen for screaming, and ordinary people stopped it. Now I want to tell you the most important story in this entire video, and I want you to hear all of it, because it is the one that changes what you should do with the anger you are feeling. In October of 2025, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is a nonprofit that has been doing digital rights work for decades, reported that Flock was rolling out a new feature. It was called Distress Detection, and it ran on the company's acoustic gunshot detection devices, which had been sold under the brand name Raven, and later just called audio detection. These are microphones mounted on poles, in public spaces, in cities across the country. The original marketing for the feature explicitly named screaming as a trigger event. The advertising showed a police alert reading screaming. The product page said it would detect sounds of human distress and cover the blind spots that cameras miss. And EFF's analysis identified 3 distinct problems. First, the civil liberties issue. High-powered microphones positioned above densely populated city streets, listening for human voices, is a category of surveillance that Americans have never consented to and that has no clear limiting principle. Second, the practical danger. Gunshot detection systems have a documented history of misidentifying other sounds as gunfire, car backfires, fireworks, construction noise. Police department audits have established this repeatedly, and the consequence is armed officers arriving somewhere expecting a shooting. In Chicago, a child was shot at by police responding to a gunshot detection alert. That is not a hypothetical. Now extend that to voices. An alert that says screaming could be triggered by kids playing, by a couple arguing loudly, by a person laughing hard, by someone yelling for a dog, and the response dispatched to a screaming alert would be officers arriving at high alert. Third, and this one is remarkable, EFF's senior policy analyst pointed out that in several places this type of listening would be illegal under state eavesdropping laws. Many states have two-party consent statutes governing the recording of conversations, and public streets are full of private conversations. So EFF wrote it up, and then people got loud. Cities started asking questions. Local news covered it. Council members who had signed contracts without reading them started getting calls. Residents showed up at meetings, and on July 17th of this year, Flock announced it was ending the distress detection pilot for human voices. They killed it, because ordinary people objected. Now I want to be careful and complete here, because a partial victory reported as a total one is how people get complacent. The hardware is still there. Thousands of acoustic devices remain installed across American communities. And the underlying capability never went anywhere. The devices were always capable of capturing any audible sound. What they listen for is a software setting. Screaming was added to that scope in October 2025 and removed in July 2026, and the exact same mechanism that allowed both decisions is still in place. Flock also advertises the audio system as having an expanding sound library that is continually trained to recognize new sounds. So, what was one is real, and what was one is narrow. A specific use was withdrawn. The infrastructure that made it possible is still on the poles, and the switch that turns capabilities on and off is still in a company's hands. But here is why I am telling you this story at length anyway. Every other thing in this video is something that happened to people. This is the one thing in this video that people did. A nonprofit read a product page. They wrote about it, regular citizens got angry and showed up, and a well-funded company with enormous police contracts reversed a product decision. That is not nothing. That is in fact the only mechanism that has ever worked. And I think a lot of people right now have concluded that nothing works, that it is all decided somewhere else, and that the only options are rage or checking out entirely. This is the counterexample. 6 weeks ago, documented. I want to say one more thing here, because I have seen a lot of comments about people damaging these cameras and some people treating that as heroic. I understand the impulse completely. I am not going to pretend I do not, but I need you to understand that it is a felony in most jurisdictions. It carries real prison exposure, and it accomplishes nothing structural, because a damaged camera is replaced within days, and the contract remains in force. Meanwhile, the person who did it now has a record, a legal bill, and no ability to show up to a council meeting as a credible community voice. The people who actually killed the microphone feature did it with a blog post and a phone campaign. That is what worked. Nobody went to prison for it. 82 contracts have been canceled, and 39 of them came in 5 months. Let me stay on this, because there is a bigger trend underneath the microphone story, and it is genuinely remarkable. Between August of 2021 and May of 2026, 82 flock contracts were terminated across 28 states, and 39 of those terminations happened in the first 5 months of 2026 alone. Read those two numbers together. Nearly half of all the cancellations in a 5-year span occurred in a 5-month window. That is not routine contract attrition. That is a reversal. The Los Angeles Police Department is the most prominent example, and it was reported as the latest in a string of law enforcement agencies cutting ties, which tells you it was not an isolated decision. The department cited wanting more protections around how information collected through the system is managed and stored. So what happened? Several things converged, and it is worth understanding them because it explains how these reversals actually occur. The audits happened when agencies finally examined the data quality. They found things like the 1 in 3 false hotlist alert rate, a tool that generates a wrong alert a third of the time, is not just a civil liberties issue, it is an operational liability. It exposes a department to lawsuits, and it wastes officer time. The misuse cases surfaced. Once officers started getting charged for using the system to track ex-partners, every city attorney in America had to think about municipal liability. The data sharing question got sharp. Cities that had signed up for a tool marketed as helping recover stolen vehicles discovered their data was flowing into a national network and could be searched by agencies with priorities their own residents had not agreed to. Sanctuary cities in particular had to reckon with a system built for one purpose being available for another. Whatever your politics on that specific issue, the underlying structural problem is one everyone should care about. A city signed up for one thing and got another, and nobody told them, and the public got loud. EFF has been doing analysis of millions of searches of this data. Journalists have been filing records requests. Residents have been showing up. Now here is what I want you to take from this, and it is the practical heart of this entire video. Every one of those 82 cancellations was a local decision, a city council, a county commission, a police chief answering to a mayor, answering to voters. Not Congress, not a federal agency, not a court ruling that came down from somewhere. Local bodies in rooms that seat 40 people, where almost nobody comes. That is where this is actually being decided. And that is genuinely good news, because it is the one level of government where an individual person still has meaningful leverage. Your congressman represents roughly 760,000 people. Your city council member might represent 20,000 and will absolutely notice if 11 of them show up at the same meeting. So if you are angry about this, here is exactly what to do, and it is specific. Find out whether your city or county has a contract with any ALPR vendor. In most places, this is a public record, and a single email to the city clerk will get you the answer. Ask what the data retention period is. Some jurisdictions hold data 30 days. Some hold it a year. Some have no clear policy at all. Ask whether your agency participates in interstate or national data sharing, and with whom. Ask whether there is an audit procedure, how often audits occur, and whether the results are public. Ask when the contract renews, because renewal is the moment when a council actually has to vote, and that is your window. And then go to that meeting, not to yell, to ask those 5 questions on the record, in public, with a reporter possibly in the room. That is the entire playbook. And it has now worked 82 times. Your car is not going to report your conversations to the police in 2027, and here is the actual law. Now I have to do something that I know some of you will not enjoy, and I am going to do it anyway, because you deserve accuracy more than you deserve agreement. There is a claim circulating everywhere right now that starting in 2027, by law, every new car will scan your face, listen to your conversations, send transcripts to the local police department, and shut off if it decides you are impaired. I have seen dozens of versions of it. Some of them have millions of views. Large parts of that are not true, and I want to walk you through what the actual law says because the real situation still deserves your attention, just for different reasons. Here is the real thing. It is called Section 24220 of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Public Law 117-58, signed on November 15, 2021. It is titled Advanced Impaired Driving Technology. It originated as a bipartisan bill called the HALT Drunk Driving Act, named after a Michigan family killed by a drunk driver. That last detail matters. This did not come from a think tank about controlling the population. It came from a family that lost people. The provision directs the Secretary of Transportation through NHTSA to issue a final rule establishing a federal motor vehicle safety standard requiring new passenger vehicles to be equipped with advanced drunk and impaired driving prevention technology. The statute contemplates two possible approaches: a passive performance monitoring system that observes driving behavior and restricts or prevents operation if it determines the driver may be impaired, or a blood alcohol detection system that prevents or limits operation when BAC meets or exceeds the legal limit of 0.08. Manufacturers could use either or both. The technology could involve cameras monitoring eye movement, sensors analyzing steering and braking patterns, or touch-based biometric readers built into the wheel or ignition surface, and it could use AI. Now here is what is not in it. There is nothing in that statute about recording conversations, nothing about transmitting audio, nothing about alerting police, nothing about a remote shutdown controlled by any government. The statute describes an onboard system making an onboard determination, and here is the timing correction that matters most. This is not starting in 2027 because there is no final rule. In January of 2024, NHTSA published an advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the earliest possible stage of the federal rulemaking process. It gathers information and comment. It does not propose specific requirements. The agency received more than 3,000 unique comments and as of early 2026 is still evaluating them. In December of 2025, it issued a separate request for comment on dashboard warning indicators. That is a very early stage regulatory process, and there is a substantial distance between where it is and a mandate on a showroom floor. There has also been active political fight over it. In January of this year, a member of Congress introduced an amendment to defund Section 24220 entirely, which would have blocked NHTSA from spending anything on implementation. The House rejected it. So the law remains in effect, and repeal efforts remain pending and have not become law. And one more correction, because I keep seeing it, this was signed by President Biden in 2021 as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law. It was not passed by the current administration. Now, why does it matter that I am correcting this rather than just writing the outrage? Because when you share the version with the fake details and somebody looks it up and finds out the conversation recording part is not real, they stop believing you about everything else, including the parts that are completely verifiably true, like 50 officers accused of using a surveillance network to stalk women. The false version is not just inaccurate, it is a gift to everyone who wants the real concerns dismissed. And there is a second cost. The clip going around says do not buy a new car because of a 2027 law. If somebody takes that advice, panic buys a used vehicle at an inflated price, or holds onto a car that is genuinely unsafe based on a mandate that does not currently exist, that is a real financial decision made on bad information. So please, share the anger. Just share the accurate version, because the accurate version is strong enough on its own. Which brings me to the next part. The real problem with that law is not what it says. It is what it leaves blank. So if the viral version is wrong, is there anything to be concerned about? Yes. And once you understand it, I think you will find it more unsettling than the fake version, because it is not a dramatic villain. It is a whole. Here is the actual problem. Legal analysts examining Section 24220 have pointed out that the statute is silent on nearly every question that matters for privacy. It does not prescribe the sensing technology. It does not set data retention policies. It does not define the threshold for preventing or limiting operation. It does not address how to accommodate false positives or medical emergencies. One privacy attorney summarized it about as plainly as it can be summarized. Under what retention schedule, with what security controls. The statute is silent, which means all of those answers get decided somewhere else. Some of them will be decided by NHTSA in the rulemaking, but a great many of them will be decided, as that same attorney noted, by what manufacturers build and by what their privacy policies and terms of service say. Read that sentence again because it is the whole ball game. The rules governing a camera pointed at your face inside your own vehicle, for the entire time you are driving will be substantially set by a document you scroll past when you connect your phone to the infotainment system. And that is not a hypothetical, because the surveillance in cars is already here, entirely separate from this law. Driver monitoring systems already exist in a great many new vehicles. Cars already generate location data. Cars already generate driving behavior data, including speed, hard braking, and cornering. Manufacturers already have relationships with data brokers and, in documented cases, with insurers. There have already been public controversies about automakers sharing driving behavior data that ended up affecting people's insurance rates without their meaningful knowledge. None of that required Section 24220. It happened under ordinary commercial terms of service because there is no comprehensive federal privacy law in the United States governing it. So the honest framing is this: the impaired driving rule is not the thing that turns your car into a surveillance device. Your car may already be one. And the impaired driving rule, if it is ever finalized, would add a camera pointed at your face to a system that already collects a great deal, in a country that has not written rules about what happens to any of it. One of the attorneys analyzing this made an observation that I think applies far past cars, and I want to leave it with you. He wrote that this reflects a broader pattern of embedded sensors and passive monitoring becoming standard infrastructure in physical environments, in vehicles, in workplaces, in commercial buildings, generating continuous data streams about individuals going about their ordinary daily activities. And the challenge that legislatures and regulators are only beginning to confront is how to govern systems that never stop collecting. Systems that never stop collecting. That is the actual thing people are sensing when they say it feels dystopian. Not a single villain. An accumulation of always-on sensors, each one individually justified, none of them governed by any comprehensive rule, all of them producing permanent records of ordinary life. So what do you actually do about the car specifically? Go into your vehicle's settings menu and look for connected services, data sharing, or telematics. Many manufacturers allow you to disable data sharing, and a lot of owners have never looked. It will not disable safety systems, but it can limit what leaves the vehicle. When you buy a car, ask the dealer directly what data the vehicle collects and transmits and whether it can be turned off. Ask for it in writing. Most salespeople will not know, and the fact that they do not know is itself informative. Check whether your insurance policy includes a telematics or safe driving program you enrolled in for a discount, because those frequently transmit hard braking and cornering data, and people forget they signed up. And if you want to see what is actually documented about your specific make, the Mozilla Foundation has published research reviewing the privacy practices of major automakers. It is free, it is readable, and the findings about the industry as a whole are genuinely eye-opening. Over 1,000 agencies are now cleared for police drone programs, and almost nobody voted on that either. Let me show you the next thing coming, because if you understand the pattern from the cameras, you can see this one arriving before it lands in your town. Police departments across the country are launching what are called drone as first responder programs. The concept is that instead of, or in addition to, dispatching an officer to a call, the department launches a drone from a rooftop station that flies to the location and provides live aerial video before anyone arrives. As of February of this year, over 1,000 public safety agencies, including police and fire departments, had cleared a necessary regulatory hurdle toward making those deployments a reality. 1,000 agencies. That is the build-out stage. That is the moment when the infrastructure gets purchased and installed, which, if you were paying attention to the license plate reader story, is exactly the moment when the rules are supposed to get written and historically do not. And I want to be genuinely fair about the case for this because there is one, and it is not stupid. A drone overhead at a structure fire gives commanders a view no ground unit has. A drone at a missing child call covers ground faster than officers on foot. A drone arriving at a report of a man with a weapon can tell responding officers whether it is a real gun or a kid with a toy, and that information can prevent a shooting. Those are real benefits, and departments citing them are not lying. But look at the structure of the thing. A drone patrol expands aerial surveillance and data collection into areas that patrol officers typically cannot reach. That is the actual selling point, in the industry's own framing. Backyards, fenced properties, rooftops. The space above your fence line that you have always reasonably assumed was yours. And every one of those flights generates video, which gets stored. Which raises exactly the same set of questions nobody answered the last time. How long is it retained? Who can search it? Is it shared with other agencies, other states, federal partners? Is there facial recognition applied to it now, or could there be later? Can you request footage of your own property? Would you ever know it existed? If the answer to those questions in your city is we have not really worked that out yet, then you are watching the identical sequence run again, and you are watching it at the exact stage where intervention is still possible, and there is a related item worth knowing about. A report from the Government Accountability Office revealed that the Department of Homeland Security plans to nearly triple the number of surveillance towers along United States borders. Fixed towers with sensors, permanent. Whatever your view on border policy, understand that surveillance towers do not only see people crossing a line, they see everyone within range, including American citizens who live and work and drive in border regions, which in this country covers a substantial population. So here is the pattern, stated plainly, because at this point you have seen it 3 times in one video. Step 1. A capability becomes cheap. Step 2. A vendor markets it to municipalities with a narrow, sympathetic use case. Stolen cars, gunshots, missing children. Step 3. Cities buy it, frequently with grant money that makes it look free, and frequently without a public hearing because it is classified as an equipment purchase rather than a policy decision. Step 4. The infrastructure goes up. Step 5. The capability expands through software, because the hardware was always more capable than the original pitch. Step 6. Somebody misuses it, an audit finds problems, and only then does anyone ask what the rules should have been. We are at step 3 or 4 on drones right now. Which means, unlike almost everything else people are angry about, this one is still upstream. The contracts in most towns have not been signed, the policies have not been written, and a city council that has already been through the license plate reader fight is a council that will actually listen when somebody stands up and says, "Before we buy this, let us write the retention policy first." That is the entire opportunity, not stopping technology, which does not work, and mostly should not. Getting the rules written before the equipment arrives instead of 5 years after. $54 for 2 movie tickets and a subscription to open your own apartment door. I want to shift to a completely different flavor of anger, because it comes up constantly, and it is not about surveillance at all, and I think it is actually the same underlying grievance wearing different clothes. A man takes his 15-year-old daughter to a 2:30 matinee. 2 tickets, 2 small popcorns, 2 small drinks, $54.86. And he remembers being a kid in the late 80s, 11 people going to a movie, somebody handing over a $50 bill for tickets and popcorn and hot dogs and candy for everyone, and getting change back. A woman apartment hunting in Los Angeles finds a 1-bedroom at $2,500 a month, no utilities included, parking extra, 3 times the rent required as income, 650 minimum credit score, and then at the bottom of the listing she finds that in order to physically enter the unit she is paying $2,500 for, she must subscribe to a monthly membership for the key fob. A monthly subscription to open your own door. Now the impulse is to call all of this greed, and some of it is, but I want to give you the actual mechanics because understanding them tells you which parts you can do something about. Start with the movie theater. Here is what most people do not know. Theaters keep a relatively small share of ticket revenue, and on an opening weekend for a major release, the studio's cut can be very high, sometimes the large majority. The exhibitor makes its actual money on concessions, which is why the popcorn costs what it costs. The theater is not gouging you on popcorn because it can. It is gouging you on popcorn because the ticket is functionally a pass-through to the studio, and the concession stand is the entire business. That does not make $54 feel better, but it tells you the theater down the street is probably not getting rich, which is why so many of them are closing, and it tells you the pricing structure is set several layers above the person selling you the popcorn. Now the apartment, which is a different animal entirely, and where the real story is, what that woman ran into has a name and policy circles: fee stacking, or junk fees. The advertised price is not the price. The advertised price is the number that gets you to click. Then you find the application fee, the administrative fee, the amenity fee, the technology fee, the package receiving fee, the valet trash fee, the pest control fee, the parking fee, the pet rent that is separate from the pet deposit, and now, apparently, a subscription to the fob that opens the door. And the reason this works is straightforward. Search platforms sort by advertised rent. So the property that puts more of its actual cost into fees ranks above the property that prices honestly. The market rewards the deception, which means honest pricing is a competitive disadvantage, which means everyone eventually does it. That dynamic is not unique to rentals. It is why airline seats cost extra now, why hotels have resort fees, why a concert ticket costs 40% more at checkout than on the listing page. Here is the part that is genuinely useful, because there has actually been movement on this The Federal Trade Commission issued a rule on unfair or deceptive fees that took effect in 2025, requiring businesses in live event ticketing and short-term lodging to disclose the total price, including mandatory fees, upfront and prominently. That is narrower than most people would want, since it does not cover long-term residential leases, but it establishes the principle in federal rule: the advertised price has to be the real price. And a number of states have gone further with their own legislation covering rental fees specifically, requiring disclosure of all mandatory charges and listings. So what do you actually do? When you look at a rental, ask for the total monthly obligation in writing before you apply, itemized, including every mandatory fee. Not the rent, the total. Ask specifically which fees are mandatory versus optional, because a lot of them are presented as unavoidable and are not. Ask whether the application fee is refundable and how many applications they are accepting, because in some markets, landlords collect 50 non-refundable application fees for one unit, which is a business model, not a screening process. Find out whether your state has a rental fee disclosure law, because if it does, an undisclosed mandatory fee may be unenforceable and you have leverage you did not know you had. And know that fees are frequently negotiable in a way rent is not. A property manager who cannot lower the rent, because rent sets the building's valuation, will often waive an amenity fee or a parking fee, because those do not affect the number on the balance sheet. I bring this up in a video about surveillance for a specific reason. Both of these things, the camera you did not consent to and the fee you did not see, run on the same principle. The important information is deliberately kept out of your line of sight until the decision is already made. That is the actual grievance underneath all of it. Not cameras specifically, not fees specifically. Being made to make decisions without the information, over and over, by systems designed that way on purpose.